Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are back with another edition of our educational speedrun series. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action with a classic 10-minute rapid game.
Zooming through the game with a bomb cloud start, trashing all your prep like it's modern art. Knight on the rim, he'll still find the win. Chat's going wild, bro thinks he's Hikaru again. Oh hey, hey, he's smurfing play-by-play, beats you blindfolded, still sipping latte. Queens are flying, eagles meet defeat, just another speed run on Hikaru Street.
So here we go. First game with the white pieces. Now, I've played all kinds of systems at the level we're at. I'm just going to keep going around the horn. I'm going to start with the move E4 here. We get G6, and now I'm going to play the move D4. Now, my opponent is moving instantly, which is interesting. My opponent playing a hyper-modern setup, trying to go for the double fianchetto. I'm going to play the move Knight to F3. I'm going to bring this knight out to guard the pawn. And my intention here is to play Bishop D3, over protecting this pawn with the bishop and the knight. And I'm going to castle my king. So let's castle, finish our development. The basics are completed. Now my opponent plays Bishop B4, which is a very strange move here. Having played this move G6, normally I would have expected my opponent to fianchetto the bishop to G7. Instead, we get Bishop B4, and because my opponent is playing so fast and so aggressively and generally just badly, for lack of a better way of putting it, I'm going to go for the punishment immediately. I'm going to play E5 here, taking space and attacking this knight. We get knight to H5. And now I'm going to play this move. What do I want to play? G4 would hit the knight. Instead, I'm going to play a very fundamentally sound move, bishop to E4, trying to trade off these bishops in the center. Now, what I want to do by playing bishop to E4 is I want to start taking advantage of all these weak dark squares around this black king here. But my opponent chooses to play knight C6 instead. Okay. So now, what do I want to do is the question. Now, there are many ways to play this position. I think what I'm going to do is just a very simple move. Bishop G5, knight guards the bishop. I attack the queen. Oh, great. We get bishop C3. This game is going to be a very short, quick doozy. I take the queen. I'm not going to lie. I'm very surprised to see someone over 1300 playing like this. Probably are just having fun moving quickly. Maybe they started with a rating of 1200 for all I know, because you can start there versus working your way up from 400. Anyway, we're up a queen here. Let's just take the bishop. What do we have? My opponent will take this bishop, and we'll have, I guess we get this. I'll take. We'll get takes. I think I'm just up a clean queen in this position. I have a queen, 2 rooks, a bishop, 2 rooks, knight. So I'm just up a clean queen. So I'm gonna go queen D6 to stop my opponent from castling. I want to move a rook, probably take the pawn, just end this game immediately here with a checkmate very, very quickly with the rook, the queen, and the bishop. This game should be over immediately. Here we get knight D5. I guess I'll just take. Why not? Let's take, activate the rook, maybe rook B8 next turn as well. King can't castle, so the game's going to end immediately. Not a whole lot to talk about with this game, unfortunately. Just a really quick, clean win. I'm going to go rook B1 here. Idea rook B8. Just go for the quick checkmate with the queen and the rook. Get F5. I guess I'll just go rook B8 anyway. Let's go check, check, and mate. Yeah, nothing really to analyze from this game. Just a clean wipeout. Not gonna lie, very, very surprised to see that in the first game. Nothing educational whatsoever, but we'll take it. Get E4. Okay, so I'm gonna play Sicilian once again. I've played a lot of Sicilians in our recent speedrun videos. It's probably my favorite opening at the beginner level with this G6 fianchetto here. Just very quick development. Worth noting, last couple times we've played it now, my opponent has not played D4 and knight takes D4 to play what's known as the open Sicilian. We get the move C3 here. Now, this is a nice try to build this big white center. In this position, what I'm going to play is I'm going to play the move D5. And the reason for this is I immediately try to attack the pawn on E4. But after takes, I'm protecting the square, I believe, with a pawn, a knight, a bishop, and a queen. So white maybe still can play D4. Instead, we get B3. I'm just going to develop knight F6 castles. Very, very easy. Finish this kingside development as quickly as possible. I do expect D4 to be played somewhere. Maybe not. Okay, let's drop the queen here. Many options. I think I'm just going to go back. Keep an eye on this pawn. If white ever plays D4 after the trade, there will always be pressure in the center. Queen to H5 might objectively be a better move, but it's a little bit awkward putting the queen on the edge. And I'm trying to follow some of the fundamental basics. So that's why I choose instead to drop the queen back to D6. We get knight A3. Okay, so I'm just going to castle, get my king out of the middle of the board. Everything so far pretty standard. Now for my opponent, the big question is, how does he develop this bishop? Does he try to play d4 to open up this diagonal, or does he put the bishop on b2 behind this pawn wall? Now we get bishop b2. I'm not a big fan of this move for a couple of reasons, as you're about to see. First, I'm going to play rook d8, really trying to pressure this pawn on d2. I also have bishop g4 to pin the knight on f3 as well, so I'm really concerned about this pawn and the placement of it. Get rook b1. Okay, let's do what is rook b1 doing? Does nothing. Okay, let's go a6. I'm going to play b5 to attack the bishop. Also, by going a6, I stop knight b5 potentially to attack my queen here. So it's dual purpose, stops knight b5, prepares b5. I'm also kind of waiting here to see what my opponent does in the center. I guess I'll go b5, kick this bishop back home to e2. I'm going to go bishop to f5 here, spying this diagonal here. My rook and queen are well placed. This is a very, very tough position for white to play. White's already in a lot of trouble, primarily because white was unable to play d4 with this pawn on c3. Normally, when you push a pawn, you really need to be playing for d4. Of course, every chess game is different, but when you get a structure where you push in a Sicilian, you're trying to play it for the center, if you don't end up getting this d4 move, this pawn becomes a huge weakness, as we're seeing already. I have the double stack pressuring the pawn, the bishop on the diagonal. This does 1-2. I take 1-2. Looks like a free pawn. Just trade it all down, up a pawn. Looks pretty straightforward here. I'm simply up a pawn here. Very, very nice position. We get knight to e3. I think I'll just go knight e4 here, opening up this diagonal, pressuring this pawn with the bishop and the knight and the rook. Okay, so we get the move c4. I'm just going to play b4 primarily because I want to maybe hook the knight on c3. I get this nice bastion with the pawn and the knight here. Wasn't the only way to play it. We get knight d5. Is anything hanging? The knight's guarding the pawn. I think here, I don't like this knight. It's kind of like it's close to all these forks here. I don't like it, so I think I'm just going to push the pawn, kick this knight out of town. Once this knight goes, also the c3 square is released for my horse here for the bastion. So I think it's just a very sensible move to kick this knight out of town. Let's go here, double stack on the only open file, only clearly open lane. As I've mentioned a few times in the past, if you have open files, it is where rooks belong. So let's go knight c3. Pawn guards the knight, knight forks the pawn and the rook. This is what, of course, is known as an outpost or a bastion in internet lingo, where this knight cannot be removed. There are no pawns. You'd love to put this pawn back here to attack the knight. You can't do it. There's no pawn here, and the knight is hooked by this pawn, so this knight can just stay here forever. Now we get rook to e1. I could take this pawn, but I think I'm just going to play like knight d4, try to trade some more pieces, open up this file. I'd really love to go rook d2 to create the kebab, but I can't. So I'm going to go knight d4 here instead. Knight takes a2, of course, completely reasonable move, but I'm just really trying hard to force my rook. And also this knight on b6 very offsides here. All these squares are kind of covered for the knight. The only square the knight has available is actually this one. Okay, my rook's under attack. Let's move the rook up, hit the pawn. So this knight is really out of play with all these squares unable to be used. I guess now there is knight d7 because the knights support each other, but still very, very hard to play. Now, probably in this position, my opponent's really worried about these pawns. You'll notice these knights are attacking these two pawns very, very quickly here. With these two pawns being super weak on these two squares, it's very, very hard to play for white. In fact, it is probably just objectively losing. So we get to move knight g4. This doesn't really do anything. I think I can just take the pawn. This pawn is hanging. Everything is guarded. Actually, you'll see here the pawns are really good. They really do dominate these knights. Like, there are all these empty squares, but the knights really just aren't active pieces here. With the pawn on b3 also collapsing next turn, this is just a clean win. I'm going to take the pawn, bring the knight back to start pushing the pawn up the board, and I should get a win in very short order. Let's just take the pawn. Nothing's hanging here. Everything's very secure on the king side. If my opponent had a bishop, for example, or a queen, you'll notice there are these dark square weaknesses, but it's just a knight. If there was a bishop that you could put like on either of these two squares, or like a queen you could put here, this would be very scary. But in this position, the dark squares are not really an issue, simply because there are no bishops or queens on the board and we're in an end game. So I'm not worried really about my king here. I'm just up a bunch of pawns on the queen side. I can just push them down the board. This will just be very, very quick if my opponent doesn't resign, which I don't think is going to happen. Get rook e3. Okay, I guess I'll go knight d2. I don't know if it's the only way to play this. It's kind of a little bit awkward for the knights because they look really good, but I can't push without hanging this knight here. So I think what I'm going to do is I think I'm just gonna how do I want to do this is the question. I think I'm gonna go here and attack the knight to try and dislodge the knight, which currently guards this pawn. Let's go here. I think this knight is getting trapped, by the way. Both these squares are covered by the rook. Go here. Both these squares are covered by the pawns. That can't go to any of these squares. This knight is just dead, completely dead. Okay, so we got the win. That's a nice clean game as well. Let's go back to start. All right, so again, my opponent chose not to play d4. As I highlighted in my last speedrun video, after knight d4 and g6, we would have gotten this classic accelerated dragon. We don't get it again. My opponent chooses not to do that. We get this position, c3. Now, generally, what I would say for my opponent, from his perspective, is if you're looking to play against the Sicilian with e4, c5, and c3, you're almost always better off just doing it right away on move 2. Because if you do it on move 2, after d5 takes and queen takes, you will always be able to get this d4 move in. Bring the knight out very, very quickly. I apparently can't draw arrows today. Bring the knight out, but you get these pawns to c3 and d4 no matter what your opponent does. For example, you get knight f6, same thing. You can always get this structure with the chain of pawns, specifically this connect 3 that I should point out. There's no way really for black to stop it, because in the game, when we get this position after c3, d5, takes, queen takes here, you'll notice that after d4, for example, black can simply take everything. And at the end, black has one extra pawn here in the center of the board. So you can't really force d4 in, and generally if you can't force this move in, it becomes kind of hard to play. Additionally, I would say when you're playing these setups in the Sicilian where you go c3 to play d4, you must get d4 in at all costs. It's imperative. If you put the pawn on d3, the structure is generally a little bit worse, because black will simply play something, just to illustrate the point, black will play something like this and immediately target this pawn on d3 as quickly as possible with the queen, the rook, and the bishop. So you really need to force in this d4 move if possible. If you're not able to get d4 in, generally these structures with c3 against the Sicilian where you have these two pawns, if you can't get this move, it's going to be a very long day. So we got b3, which is a bad move here. Knight to a3 would have been the best move, because after knight to f6, now white can play d4. If I take, there's knight b5 with a classic family fork idea, and after queen d8, you can simply take, for example. You could even just play pawn takes pawn here, and you get the structure as well. I get that black is better according to the computer, but you really must get this d4 move in at all costs if you have the structure in the Sicilian. So we got b3, knight f6, bishop c4. d4 would have been playable here too, but after takes and castles, black is still quite a bit better here with rook to d8. A lot of pressure on this diagonal, and in the center of the board, there's even bishop g4 to undermine the knight. Very tough position to play. So we got bishop c4. I drop back, knight a3. Probably I should have played a6 here to stop knight b5, but I castled. Bishop b2 is played. d4, again, maybe it's possible here, but as you can tell from the evaluation, after a6, I think the problem is there's bishop g4, there's b5, there's rook d8, and you have problems on this diagonal as well. Knight e4 also a threat. It's just a very hard position for white to play here. Just not easy at all. So we got bishop b2. I played rook d8, rook b1, a6. Now we get this, and already here the opening has been a complete bust, because white is not going to be able to play d4. We get d3. That just wonders a pawn. Now it's just a hard position to play. We get here, knight d4, rook d2, and honestly at this point there's just not a whole lot white can do. The queenside pawns are going to collapse, as we saw in the game. There's just nothing to do. No counterplay really. The rest I don't think we need to analyze. So the main takeaway from this game that I would give as general advice is, if you want to play for c3 and d4, you should always play c3 and d4 on move 2. This is what's known as the c3 Sicilian, or the Alpine Sicilian. If you're desperate to play this, you should do it in this order, because if you do it in any other order, it's very difficult. Actually, here you still could go c3 as well, and it still would be playable. But generally, if you don't know exactly how you're timing it, and then you get it wrong, you play it like this. After d5 takes 6, you're not able to get this d4 move in right away, because it hangs a pawn, and it's just very hard to play. White is still in the game here, but if you're at a beginner level, even like more intermediate perhaps, if you don't find a way to play the correct order and you don't get to go d4 when you have these pawns here, it's just going to be a long game and a long day, and you're probably going to be very frustrated by the end result. Okay, let's keep going with our next game. Here we go. We have the black pieces. I think I'm actually going to keep playing a Sicilian, assuming we get e4. I'm going to keep playing a Sicilian until we get the accelerated dragon. This time we get d4. Okay, so d4, many options here. I'm going to play d5 and e6. Very simple, easy development here. I bring the knight out, bring the bishop out. We get the trade. You almost always take with the pawn when you play these setups. If you get the pawns opposing like this and your opponent takes, you're always going to take with the pawn. You're never going to take with the queen. Main reason is you want to stop white from building this big white center. Here e4 would hang a pawn, so you don't want to allow these pawns out. Now it's interesting because my opponent played e3. Normally in these situations, white will play bishop to f4 followed by e3, a la the London system, because now after e3 this bishop is kind of locked in behind the pawns, and I'm actually very happy because now I get this great bishop on the diagonal again, and this is a dream come true from the start. We get a3. I'm just going to go c6, protect the pawn, stop any knight c3, knight b5s. You guys have seen this in a million of my games now, where you get this chain of 3 and the pawn kind of guards, it dominates this knight jump. Very, very effective connect 3 with the bishop inside. So you get knight c3. Now I could bring my bishop out, I can also bring the knight out. I think I'm just going to follow simple rules. Just bring the knight, castle the king, keep it as simple as possible. Let's castle. Now I need to start thinking about my queenside pieces, how to develop them. Probably I'm going to play rook to e8, and I'm going to go for a very fancy schmancy maneuver here. I'm going to probably bring my knight to g6, go 1 2 3. Yeah, let's go 1 2 3. My opponent has played this opening completely fine, by the way. This is not anything special. If I were playing a really strong player, most likely I would say that I would have probably played the move bishop to f5 here, because what you'll notice in this position is that now white also has a great bishop mirroring my bishop. So both of these two bishops have great diagonals that are open in this position. So probably if I were playing a strong player, what I would have done here is I would have gone bishop f5. If white goes bishop d3, I'm glad to trade, because then we get a case of these two bishops, and this bishop must be better than this bishop, which is walled in by the pawns. But I didn't do it, so now my opponent has gotten a good bishop as well. We get f4, which is kind of a weird move. I think my opponent's looking to attack on the king side here. So what I'm going to do is I see a weakness on e3. So I'm going to look to try and supercharge the center, open it up, create some chaos here. My opponent castles. Okay, I'm going to go a6. My idea is to play b5 and bishop b7 to develop this bishop into the game. Bishop really doesn't have scope. I can move the knight, but you'll notice there's a pawn here. Bishop isn't really going anywhere, so I think b5 or b6 are both playable. Actually, my opponent might be looking to take. Am I worried? Maybe. So okay, let's see. What do I want to do here? I'm going to go for something very deep and conceptual. Probably most people won't understand. So I'm going to go for sacrificing a pawn here with b6. I'm looking to develop the bishop to finish the development on the queen side. But after takes, I'm actually going to sacrifice a pawn here. And the reason I'm going to sacrifice a pawn is because this pawn is a super weak pawn in the center of the board. You can't push it forward. White has pushed both these pawns. So pawn doesn't have any support from behind on either of these two squares. So therefore, because there's no support of this pawn, I'm actually okay here with the rook spying it. We get g4. Okay, logical move. My opponent's playing very aggressively. Now I'm going to trade the pawns on d4. Probably I should have done this right away. Let's see how my opponent captures. I'm guessing you capture with the knight. No, we get a pawn takes. Okay, so let's go bishop b7 here. My idea is to play knight to e4 to contest the center of the board. Once I go knight to e4, I blunt the threats on this diagonal from the bishop, as I will clog it. Okay, let's go here. And pre-move pawn takes. Get bishop to e3, logical move. Okay, now in this position, I kind of wish my pawn were on b5 here so I could go move this knight in, but it's not, so it's kind of how it goes. I think what I will play here is I'm just going to go rook c8. I'm going to try to put some pressure on this open file potentially with the rook. I have queen to h4 here as well. Okay, I think now I'm going to go b5, and the reason I'm going to do is I really need this knight to get into the game, and the two squares that are available, whoa, that's actually a blunder, are b6 and f6 here. b6 is really good because I can go there or there, but after b4 this actually loses the game. I set up a double stack and suddenly both these pieces are loose. That's why b4 is bad. The pawn was supporting the knight. Now white's going to lose some material here with the queen and the rook, and I should just win this game pretty quickly. My opponent actually played very well up to this point. My opponent understood the opening before going wrong, so I have to give credit to him. But now the position is really going to collapse immediately here for white. Got bishop d2, trying to guard the knight, logical move, but I have e3 here, undermining the bishop, which guards the pawn. I have a rook as well. Additionally, I also now have an open diagonal. There might be some idea of a double A battery as well. Okay, that's just a desperado sack, doesn't change anything. Go back. I think what I'm going to play here is I'm just going to go knight f6, and the reason I'm going to play this move is I want to go queen c6 with a double A battery, but if I were to play queen 6 right away, there's d5. Of course this also would be winning, but I'm trying to set it up where if d5 I can just take with a knight, and this queen and bishop will just massacre on this diagonal. Okay, we get rook c1. I think I can just set it up anyway, double A battery. After d5 I just take. d5 actually the only way to stop the mate. Both these squares are in play, and that's just GG. King can't move to f2. Pawn covers the square. So let's take a look at the game. Let's refresh. Apparently something's going on. Let's refresh it. Okay, here we go. Okay, so let's go back. So in this game, this opening is completely fine for white. I probably should have played bishop to f5 here. Worth noting, if I were to try bishop f5 early to stop this idea, then there might be a queen b3 hitting both these pawns at the same time. So c6 makes a lot of sense, because once I guard here after knight c3, if I go bishop f5, now the pawn is protected. If white goes queen b3, I can simply move a queen to d7 or c7. Doesn't really matter, but there's no issue with the pawns. They're all guarding each other very, very neatly. So instead I did this, as I was trying to point out during the game, if I play bishop f5 and we get something like this, for example, my bishop is simply a little bit better than white's dark square bishop, because the bishop is hemmed in by the pawns. But it's worth noting that even though it might look better objectively here with the bishop hemmed in, white is actually completely in the game, because there are long-term plans with things like f3 and then e4 to open up the diagonals and build this big white center. So it's not completely clear cut. This order, of course, as you can tell from the eval bar, it's very, very bad for white, but in general that is one of the themes once white has played like knight e2 and castles and then e4. All right, so we got h3. I castled bishop d3, rook e8, logical. f4, played c5 here. Main point behind c5 is that now after c5, this is about pawn structure. If white were to take, this pawn on e3 is a super weakness, whereas if white were to just castle and I ever go c5, something like this, white is completely fine because the pawns guard each other, and now my pawn is a weakness, is what's known as an isolated pawn here. This pawn on d5 here, where white has these two pawns that protect each other. But whenever white goes f4 here, and now you create this weakness on e3, it is difficult to play for white. So we get this. I played b6. Apparently I should have played b5 or knight b6 maybe. It's kind of funny. I went b6 because for a second I thought after takes I could maybe take with the pawn, but okay, so I go b6, we get g4, I go here, we get takes, bishop b7, knight g3. Very important, by the way, that white's big plan here, it looks really scary, is white wants to play something like queen d3 or knight g3 and knight f5, and it actually looks very dangerous, but all these ideas kind of die immediately, because after knight g3 and I play this move knight to e4, now I completely clog this diagonal. After takes, this bishop simply has no scope in the center. You've also pushed these pawns in front of this king, so this king on g1 can become very, very weak in a hurry, and as you can tell, black is actually a little bit better, even though it looks very scary initially. Now if I were playing from the white side here, probably I would have looked to play something like knight g3, knight f5 right away, because as you see in this position, it looks very scary. But now I'm simply going to put the rook on c8, as we saw in the game, b5 here with the idea of knight b6, d5, or knight c4 to hit the pawns. Very, 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 very problematic for white to play at this point. We get b4, which loses. Probably bishop b3 is the best move, but after like knight b6 and then knight c4, black is just doing very, very well here. Also f5, hard move to play, because now you open up threats on this diagonal. You don't really want to go f5, you don't really want to go g5, but it's also very hard to sit on the position, because eventually these bishops are going to open up on the diagonals if you don't start pushing. And if white were to try and hold with something like rook c1, probably something simple like queen d7 followed by rook c8 and a5 and b4, and eventually I'm going to break through on the c file with the double stack. So you got b4, I go here. Now it's just over because you can't guard all the pieces here. They're just stuck in the box. Get takes, and the rest, of course, pretty straightforward here. White could play d5, but after takes, knight e4 and knight c3 here. Say white takes. Again, the double A battery is simply too much here. This white king is just going to get checkmated on g1. All right, so we have time for one more. Let's get going. We'll do one more game. Here we go. We got the black pieces again. We get d4. I'll play d5 and e6 to stick with the themes here. Okay, we get e3. Okay, so I'm gonna go, I guess I'll go e6. Why not? Let's develop. Bishop goes to e7, d6, and I castle. I guess I'll put it on d6 here. It looks more effective maybe in the long run. I'm gonna castle. Okay, now what I'm gonna do here is a little bit unusual. I'm gonna play c6, and the reason I'm gonna play c6 is, again, I'm gonna create this chain, stop knight b5, but I'm looking to open up the center of the board immediately here by playing e5, where these pawns are good and the knight has no scope. So we get knight h4. I'm just going to play e5, try to open up this diagonal for the long run. I'll take with the knight. My opponent's piece is a little bit passive. Knight h4, not a great move. The knight doesn't do a whole lot here. This is one of the reasons I oftentimes advocate that you finish your development immediately, because when you do these awkward moves like knight h4, it really does open the door for weird things to happen. So I'm going to take. And the funny thing is, just like the last game, my opponent has pushed the pawn to f4, thus creating this backwards pawn on e3 that can become a big weakness here. So this is just a free pawn. There's just a pin. That's just a big mistake. Big mistake. And I'm just going to win this game very quickly, in fact. Get king d1. In many ways to play this, which should be winning. I think I'm going to... I don't want to get too frisky here. Okay, let's just go bishop g3, attack the knight. Probably will get knight to f5. I'm going to go knight e4, looking for the family fork with knight to f2. Okay, I'm going to take, keep the pin alive. We'll get takes. I'll take. Should just be up one pawn here. If white takes the bishop, you lose the queen in this position. So my opponent is thinking in this position. I'm not sure about what exactly, but my opponent is thinking here. We get rook g1. That's just a bad move. I take, and now I attack the queen. Now you'll notice that I'm also up a piece. I just drop back. 2 bishops versus 1 bishop. This king is very weak. Just going to try to blow up the center here and just checkmate on the E and the D files here. This king is just completely done. Generally, if your opponent has a king in the middle of the board, whether you're if you're ahead in material or even you're behind by a pawn or two, if you can try to attack before your opponent can finish their development, generally it's what you're aiming for. Here I have an extra bishop on the board, so it's not necessarily a huge issue, but generally there's like a king in the middle and you can force open a file by pushing pawns. You should always look to do that. I'm going to go d3 here, further forcing it open. Let's just take with the bishop, maybe check the king. I would take with the bishops. I want to keep these diagonals open for the queen, maybe f6 or h4 here. Let's go check. I think we'll get king d2. I think I'm just going to play rook d8 here. My rook guards the bishop. The other rook guards the bishop. This king is just getting checkmated very, very soon. For a second, I was trying to figure out if queen to f2, king d3, rook a d8 was a checkmate. That's why I sort of, for a second, I paused because I wasn't sure if it was. Probably it was actually a checkmate, but what I did is good enough and very, very sensible as well. So we get g5. This should just be checkmate. There we go. There we go. We got the checkmate. All right, so let's take a look at the game. So we go back. All right, so this opening pretty standard, not super exciting. Worth noting here, my opponent probably should have tried to play e4 to open up the diagonal. We have the exact same structure. You'll notice both of us have the bishops, and we have the closed diagonals for the bishop. So it would have made sense here for white to play e4 to try to open up the diagonal. After e4, it's probably very equal, because what would have happened is I would have played e5, and after takes, probably a balanced position. If white goes queen h5, which you might be thinking hits the bishop and threatens a checkmate here, black can simply play f5, stopping the checkmate threats and attacking the bishop on e4. So probably this would be about equal. White should probably take, and then castle, and after rook to e8, maybe bishop f4, takes, and it's very, very equal here. White has a very slightly better light square bishop with the wooden shield, but not a whole lot going on in the game. Is likely to end in a draw at the top level. Instead, we got knight h4, which allows me to play e5, and now once we get this position with both diagonals open, structurally black is better. If white tries to play e4, which makes a lot of sense here, it doesn't work, so I can just take, and then after queen h4, I'm simply up material. Even if white were to play this differently, let's say white were to castle, not king f1, white were to castle, and you get this position as well, it's still very tough, because after e4 in this position, I can take, and after knight takes e4, I can take this bishop, and then I can just drop back, and now I have the bishop pair, and there's a weak pawn. This is pretty advanced. I would say the beginner level, don't worry about any of this, but just for anyone who's intermediate or better, this would be an advantage for black, which is why already in this position it's too late if you don't go e4 before black goes to e5. We got knight h4, got the trade f4, and now it's kind of ironic because like the previous game, there's this very weak pawn on e3 here. We get g4. Say white were to castle, which is what I'd normally expect. After bishop c5, pressuring this pawn on e3. Say white goes bishop d2. There's probably like knight e4 here. Let's say takes, knight f3. Even queen to e7, for example. There's just so much pressure in the middle of the board here. There's rook f4, which is good, but there's even bishop to f5 here as well. Look at these two bishops, the massive pressure in the center of the board. Triple stack incoming as well. Black's position is simply overwhelming. So we got the move g4 instead. I took the free pawn due to the classic pin of the king on this file. We got king d1, bishop g3. Now I played knight e4, a little bit much. Perhaps I should have just traded and then gone for this line in the other order. Ironically, it worked out very neatly because when I played this, takes here. Not, by the way, rook takes knight, because then I lose the bishop in the game. White has one extra piece here. When I take, white should probably simply go pawn takes bishop, but after rook e4, it's going to be very similar here. I'm gonna gang up with a triple stack on the file and probably bring a bishop to g5 or to f2 to win this pawn. And with the triple stack crashing through, this is just going to be an easy win for black. Instead, we got rook g1, which just hangs the knight, and then I'm basically able to force open the center of the board with the two bishops. This king is just getting checkmated. d3, queen h4, check. Probably queen to f2 would have been slightly quicker. I see it's a forced mate. After takes, I have check, king c4, check, king b4, and then I have a5 check to undermine this king. White takes, there's bishop d6 check, queen c5. I think rook is it. There's no mate in one here. I have to take, and then like rook to a8 is checkmate. So everything wins. And if white were to take with the king here, I simply take the queen, and then it's checkmate. So either way, no matter what happens, this would have led to a very slightly quicker checkmate. But of course, I played rook d8, which is completely sensible. The rook guards the bishop, rook guards the other bishop, and queen f2 is just a free hand. This king is going to get fossilized every which way very soon. So nothing that white can do. We got g5, and then of course checkmate by force after queen f2 and queen e2. So, all right, those were some interesting games that we played today. I hope you learned something from them. A couple of the games, like the first one, were extremely quick, but still, we're trying to give you some educational content. Hope you guys did enjoy this video. So that's going to do it for our latest edition of the educational speedrun series. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with more great speedrun and educational content in the very near future. Have a great one. See you guys. Bye.